Welcome, 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 Adam Curry, to our very, very big Omni exclusive interview. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our Omni audience is super excited to hear more about you and all the cool stuff you're doing and everything that you've done in the past. I mean, you are a tech entrepreneur, you are starting an app, you know consciousness reality on a very deep level. I mean, we are so excited. So before we get into some of the questions that we've prepared to talk about, let's go ahead and have you just talk a little bit about yourself, who you are. For anyone that doesn't know you, kind of what you do, maybe give us some personal information if you want, if you feel like you want to do that as well. So go ahead, Adam, just talk to us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a tech entrepreneur, but I think most people know me through the work with consciousness research that I was a part of. So what is consciousness? Well, consciousness is, the nature of our minds. It's the question of our awareness. What is it? Where does it come from? What are its capabilities? And this question has been explored empirically or scientifically by a number of laboratories, of which one was the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, another is IONS, one of which I was associated in, and the other IONS, my present colleagues. But I'm really interested in the connection between consciousness research and technology, and the extent to which we can learn from consciousness research and plug that into technology to create technology that works differently than any other technology before, and also can be sort of a reflection or a mirror of the deeper subjective side of our existence.
Exactly. Well, that's perfectly said. And it just lends itself right into our very first question for you about consciousness specifically. So what we'd like to start off asking you about is about the consciousness project, specifically RNGs, the random number generators that are all over the planet. Talk a little bit about that aspect too, because I don't think a lot of people know about that whole system that's set up, and how this consciousness project is relating itself to the interaction, or maybe even the intersection between reality, physical reality, and consciousness. So go ahead and give us a little bit of a background on that.
Sure. There's a lot to unpack there. So perhaps I'll start with telling a story. So once upon a time in 1979, there was a gentleman named Robert John, who was a very gifted engineer. And he became the dean of the engineering school at Princeton and was kind of the grandfather of plasma propulsion. Very gifted gentleman. He was dean, I think, still in his 40s. And at one point, there was a student, an undergrad, who came to him, and she said, "I need your help." And she said, "Well, we're doing a senior project that needs to be an engineering project, and I'm fascinated with this question about mind over matter." And he said, "What is mind over matter?" And she said, "Well, there's been some reports that our intention, or human consciousness, can affect the output of random systems. There's not any reason why this should be happening in terms of mainstream textbook science, but a number of serious people indicate that it is possible, and I would like to design an experiment to test that." Now, Bob had no prior experience or interest in this area, but he felt that this was an opportunity for an interesting research project and would have some technical sides to it. So he agreed to supervise the project. So they built what's called a random number generator, or a hardware random number generator. And what that does is it measures intrinsically random physical phenomena. So this is often like a radioactive decay that's unpredictable off of an isotope, or electron tunneling, which is a quantum phenomena that is unpredictable, or the passage of photons through a barrier. And so this random number generator produces a truly random output of bits of ones and zeros, right? And each bit represents some physical random, something random in the physical world. So the undergraduate, with Bob's oversight, builds this device, this random number generator. She sets up an experiment in which an individual is asked to try to shift the output of the random number generator using only their mind, only their intention. Over the course of a significant number of attempts, the data showed that there was an anomalous and unexplained effect that was consistent with the person's intention. And Bob was baffled, and the student said, "See, I told you it works," and left. But Bob was left contemplating results that were not explicable in according to the standard model. And what he felt was that his whole professional career had been in service of advancing engineering. And you can think of engineering as, in a way, where consciousness and the physical world meet. It's the built environment. It's what we conceive of in our imaginations and the tools and techniques to deploy it in the world, right? This is engineering in its highest timeline. And so he felt that understanding the deeper relationship between consciousness and the physical world was very important for understanding the sort of metaphysical boundaries of engineering itself. And he had correctly recognized that this question had been insufficiently treated in academia. You know, the consciousness was a word that you didn't utter in the hallowed halls of academia back then. Of course, it's the most popular subject in school now, but
now, right, exactly.
Back then it was not. And so he established a laboratory called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, or PAIR as an acronym.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funded by also very serious people, and it existed in the laboratory or in the engineering quad of Princeton, and it operated for about 20 years. There's a staff of experimental psychologists, of rocket scientists, and others, I guess, engineers, who were doing variations of these experiments, testing to see how, if and how consciousness influences the physical world, and what are the criteria for how it does. And anyway, near the end of the laboratory, the 20 some years of it running, almost 30 years, they had accumulated a database that indicated greater than 1 billion to 1 odds against chance that there is something going on here. Satisfied this question of, okay, there is something more to consciousness than just an illusion produced by the brain. It does extend out somehow and interact with the physical world.
It does interact with the physical world, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's really their legacy. Okay, now, sometime in the middle of the PAIR laboratory, there were 2 scientists who worked there, Roger Nelson, who was an experimental psychologist, and Dean Radin, who was a physicist. And they probably over a couple of beers one night had this idea that, well, why don't we take some of these random number generators in the lab and we spread them around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and just see what happens. So we'll collect the data from a central server. So they set this up, and they called it the Global Consciousness Project. And the idea was to try to detect coherence among the random number generators that might coincide with global events. So most famously, of course, there was the September 11th case where a few hours before the first plane struck the tower, you had this incredible spike in covariance or anomalous functioning of the devices that lasted throughout, half that day.
Right. Yeah. It's really well documented, that case in the random number generators.
That's right.
That's a really good. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yep. That's the one that most people know.
That's the one that put it on the map. Mm-hmm. Consciousness Project.
And they have now a database of several hundred other events of some significance going back 20 years. And so what they'll do is they'll sort of indicate or pre-state what a qualifying event would be. And then once one of those things happen, then they'll go and look in the data and they'll kind of look before and during and after.
Exactly.
Yep, and see if there was an effect there. Now, there's definitely an effect. The question is, what's causing that effect? Okay, and so this is where the interpretation of the global consciousness data, this is the fun stuff to me anyway.
Yeah, and then this is where you come in. Someone so go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you interpret that interaction.
So there's different ways to look at it.
Yeah, okay. But go ahead.
One way to look at it is that mass attention or emotion is somehow emanating from the people of the planet, and it's affecting physical reality around it. And the random number generators are detecting that coherence that skews the randomness into order somewhat, and we see it. Okay, this is as though each random number generator was like a thermometer taking the global temperature or something. I don't necessarily think that's the case. What I think is happening is that there's an expectation that these random number generators will behave a certain way during certain events. And it's that expectation that's driving the phenomena, that's driving the outcome.
Could we say there might be some psychic things happening, like humans are feeling something in the field of reality before something happens?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I believe that's true. In fact, there's other very much more focused experiments in the parapsychology world.
I first want to acknowledge that not a lot of people are going to know what parapsychology is. So can you explain what that, in context, what that means to you and what that means to your research? And then I'll ask my other question.
So in this context, you could say that parapsychology is a umbrella term for the type of research that was done at the Paralab.
Okay.
So psychic research or psychokinesis, these types of things are
Would
kind
remote
of
viewing be under that umbrella
it
as
would.
well? Okay, a lot of people
Yeah.
know remote viewing. Okay, we'll just
Yeah.
use that as an example.
That shows that we do have a presentiment effect. And so you could say that maybe this is a mass presentiment effect among the people who know about and are interested in
the outcome of these let's call them
exactly.
like platforms. I don't know, because they're hardware, but they're also software. So just say they're platforms.
Right.
Okay.
Can also be what's known as a retrocausal effect. Now, one thing that we've demonstrated, or that was demonstrated in the lab, and also in other mainstream quantum labs, is this concept of retrocausation, which is that something in the present actually affects something in the past. So the arrow of causality is going from now sort of backwards in time.
You're just like stealing my heart away. I love this kind of conversation because I think a lot of physicists do talk about this.
There's also an expectation that the global consciousness data, or the RNG data, can pick up signals that begin before the actual event. Okay, so a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be that after the event happens, then there's like a retrocausal effect on the RNGs prior to the event, just because that has become the expectation post the 9/11 results. Now you could go even further, and you could say, well, if it's all expectation and you're not actually measuring global consciousness as such,
yes,
you could say, well, the expectation is that it's measuring global consciousness, and so it is measuring global consciousness because the expectation is that it is measuring.
It is, yeah. It is, no matter what the time frame is, it just is.
Correct. And so maybe here's a clarifying way to look at what I'm saying. And this was true. You have a building, and in that building you have two rooms, and in one room you have a laboratory that's doing consciousness research with a random number generator, and in the other room you have an office that has no idea what's going on inside this room. The random number generator does not show any effect that would correlate with the person in the other room. It's only when somebody is attempting to influence it, meaning they've created some sort of informational connection or association. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so if there's people that have no connection, no knowledge of, no feedback from the random number generators, you could say, well, are they really entering that equation at all? Are they really part of that informational connection? What I would say is probably not. I don't necessarily think they are, unless they are from the future somehow, sending the effect backwards in time. But
we'll talk about that on our next talk. Huh?
So, and that's one feature of sort of how consciousness interacts with the physical world, is that it doesn't really behave according to the normal sort of boundaries or conditions that we think of as normal forces. So a typical force, you could describe as falling off by the square of the distance between two objects, of not being able to go backwards and forwards in time. The consciousness stuff seems to be distance independent, and also as we're talking about time independent. So it's not really a physical force as we're used to thinking of it, but more of like an informational connection where there's some sort of meaning that's transpiring between the individual or the group of individuals and the device or the object or the situation in question.
Right.
I think meaning is a very powerful thing in reality.
It's almost like the conversation or the communication between two entangled particles, sort of like that. Happens it's sort of like that. It only can happen if those particles have a connection or were part of one system and then became disconnected at some point, and then they have the conversation. They can continue the conversation. It's what I'm on a very basic level. We're not going to go into that, but what I completely understand what you're saying. What I find fascinating is what you just brought up is that if someone doesn't know that this platform is near them, nor do they want to create a connection with this platform, the platform will not relay any messages. It won't have a conversation with them.
Exactly.
Only when there's a connection will these random number generators pick up something.
Yep. It's basically excluded from their reality.
So this is a perfect segue into our next question for you. And it's all about consciousness and mindfulness. So now that we've set up what consciousness is, like you said, it's an application of the mind, but it's so much more than that. But it really is this insane connection that you can have. So it sounds like you really believe in consciousness as a powerful force within the universe, like beyond just Earth. So go ahead and kind of explain why you think consciousness, mindfulness is so important just to be or to engage with or to practice, and how consciousness technology can really help us do this. Form an integration, form a connection.
So now we'd be moving away from the empirical research side and just into the
we want to hear more about what you feel and think.
Yeah, this is just Adam's speculation.
Yeah, I love it. That's what we want.
So why is mindfulness important? It's important, in my opinion, because very few of us are living up to our potential. And mindfulness and meditation is a practice of awakening to our own consciousness. And when that happens, transformations transpire inside of us. And these transformations are good things because they're healing and they unlock new ways of seeing reality that I think are more congruent with the truth. And it helps us to interrupt our own patterns in life, which without it, I think we would, the autopilot scripts in our mind would lead us to a rather mediocre existence compared to our potential.
Said so well. Said so well. It gets us out of the default setting of life.
Correct.
So how can consciousness technology help us engage on that kind of level to get us to our fullest potential?
So I'm working on that one, and there's a lot of really gifted people who are working on that question too. And I think that you approach it from different ways. I was part of this group called Consciousness Hacking back in San Francisco, which was trying to figure this out. And like Mikey Siegel and that crew, and their perspective, well, let's put it this way. They created an open forum for technologists who are interested in consciousness to come together and to show off their ideas of how to answer that question. And that produced a lot of different things. These are meditation apps. So, these are apps that you can download on your phone, which remind you to meditate, which gamify meditation, which provide, can connect you to teachers and just give you the tools to actually do it. And that's tremendously helpful. And those have become quite popular. There are feedback technologies, for example, EKGs that can give you feedback about your heart rhythms, which can help you get a handle on stress in your life. There are EEGs, which through neurofeedback, like the bands, the Muse bands and so forth that go on your cranium and measure your brain waves and can give you feedback to try to provide you with a greater degree of mindfulness. And that can be very helpful. My approach is more exotic. Since I kind of come from this, I use the word parapsychology, but from this like psychokinesis perspective, which is to say that I believe that consciousness and the physical world are interacting all the time, and that this creates an opportunity for a new domain of technology, a new kind of technology that isn't measuring brain waves or EKGs, but that is measuring, if you will, or driven by the very connection between our own consciousness and the fabric of physical reality. So what does that look like? Well, it's feedback. In some sense, I think that the reason why we even have a body is because it's a feedback mechanism for our own consciousness. You could say maybe even that the physical world is a technology of consciousness, and it exists to provide feedback to that consciousness to increase its own awareness. But these are deep thoughts.
Okay, so let's talk just quickly about the body, because we're going to move on to our next question, and it kind of relates to the feedback loop you were just explaining. So go ahead and talk just a little bit more about your view on the body being a feedback loop, or almost this tactile experience to build more awareness and a connection with consciousness on this reality, on this earth. Because, right, this is the body that we have here. May not be somewhere else, but here we have it.
Mm-hmm.
So why is this body so specific to connecting with consciousness in this reality?
So my perspective is that our physical side, our body, exists to localize our non-physical consciousness into this dimension. That's a mouthful, but it makes sense.
Said very
I think.
well. It does. You're saying that it's almost like a honing device, like a lightning rod. It brings consciousness right down to this reality.
There's a great metaphor of the television set, right?
Yeah.
So you could look at the picture on a TV and say that the TV is producing the picture, which would be the kind of conventional perspective on the brain and consciousness, like the brain is producing the picture. But it may be something more like what a TV actually does, which is that it localizes the TV signals in the airwaves and translates it into into a scene that you experience. And it looks like the TV is producing the signal, but it's actually coming from elsewhere. And so you could probably make an argument that the nervous system is something like a localizing technology of consciousness, and the body around it is in support of the nervous system. And meditation and such things is a process of refining the nervous system and making it more coherent to accept higher consciousness. And that's what happens, right? And you can even measure this quite clearly with EEGs and with technicians who know what they're doing. As the brain becomes more coherent to itself, the hemispheres are synchronized, the frontal lobe and gamma activity is paramount, then you have the subjective experience of heightened and greater consciousness coming through.
We often see the end of the story, and then when we peel back the layers, like you're saying, we see a much bigger story unfold, and that's consciousness.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. Well, this comes to our very last question for you. Very last question is about your amazing, awesome Entangled app that people are so obsessed with. They're on a wait list. I'm on the wait list. I mean, everyone is super obsessed. So go ahead and tell us more about this incredible app you're creating, what stage you're in, and also how you see it just fulfilling a huge gap that we've been talking about this whole time. The connection of physical reality and consciousness, but more importantly, just a connection, like a direct connection to consciousness. So go ahead and tell us more about this amazing app. We're so excited. I'll let you go. Go ahead.
Talking about consciousness and random number generators is a little bit like reading recipes, in the sense that you're not totally satisfied until you actually make it for yourself and eat it. And so there's there's a lot of content about this stuff. There's not a lot of meals prepared. And so Entangled is my attempt to give people a direct first person experience of all this consciousness and random number generator and global consciousness project stuff. So we kind of announced that we wanted to do this some years ago. And Entangled is a kind of you can think of it maybe as the next phase of the global consciousness project, or a jumping off from the global consciousness project. And that's, it's a mobile app that when downloaded converts hardware processes inside your phone into a true random number generator. So you've got one of these, you've got an RNG data stream running for you all the time. And what that does is it enables you to get direct feedback from what your consciousness might be doing moment to moment. That is to say that, let's say that you are having a great time with friends. You might look at the graph or get a push notification that says that your random number generator is spiking. Yeah.
So cool.
You might be in a flow state and get feedback about that. You might also be, not doing so well and get feedback.
And feedback about that.
That's right. Now, what's cool about the smartphone approach is that everyone who downloads it, by definition, is connected to it. So they have
and we have such an intimate relationship with our devices. So like you were just saying before, that relationship helps a lot too.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
Everyone is now a direct participant
in
this.
consciousness. Yeah.
Right. And that allows us to do, it becomes an enormous consciousness research project, because the data, we can anonymously collect the data, and we can look at it in all kinds of interesting ways that will really answer a lot of these outstanding questions that we haven't been able to really get a handle on for the last few decades.
What's one of the questions that you hope to answer? One of the burning
one of the questions is global consciousness something that is like literally radiating out, that we're measuring, like the thermometer approach, or is it more on the meaningfulness spectrum? So here's an example.
Okay.
Let's say that you've got users around the world. You've got a couple of million users around the world. And let's say that you run this, you ask people whether or not they're a Boston Red Sox fan. And the Boston Red Sox fans are scattered, around the country and around the world. The Red Sox win the World Series, right? Let's say that there's all the Red Sox fans are watching, and that means that their entangled data is responding, and then they win, and it's this big thing. So you would only be able to tell if you only had just a few of these things spread around the world. You may or may not be able to see any effect. But if you've got people with this app on their phone and they've indicated they're a Red Sox fan, now you can look at just Red Sox fans around the world and everybody else and see if there's a spike in the data. And that would tell you for sure that this is more of a meaningfulness thing.
What I love about what you're talking about is that you're going to let the data speak for itself. You may have your hypothesis, but you're not going to say anything. Like with this story, you're not going to say whether it's meaningful, consciousness is based on a meaningful connection versus just world consciousness until you see the data.
Right.
So when do you expect to have this kind of data once you launch Entangled?
So we've built over the last couple of years, we've built one or two prototypes.
Yeah.
It turns out that this is actually very challenging. To get high quality random data from the phone is challenging. But we've got a beat on a different way of doing it now.
Okay.
And so actually just a few hours ago, I saw some feedback from sort of mapping the data on the app. So I'm pretty excited about how it's turning out.
We're excited.
It's I've got a lot going on elsewhere, but I'm hoping that sometime this year, this is 2022, maybe by the end of the year, we'll be able to actually have a beta product to launch to the growing list of very patient.
Can't wait to be your beta testers.
This will be a fun project.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with Omni and our wonderful cosmic audience who is going to
Mm-hmm.
Love all this additional information. Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
Yeah, well, if you're interested in Entangled, you can just search go to entangled.org or search consciousness app and it'll come up. Jump on the wait list. You can join Twitter. These are probably the best ways. I'll make announcements as I have announcements to be made.
Oh my gosh, Adam, so much fun talking to you. Again, you can get on the wait list. Highly recommend everyone getting on that wait list to experience consciousness at a whole new level. Thank you so much, Adam, for all of this. All the information you talked about will be in the links, and I'll link to your website. And thank you so much. Thank you
You got
so,
it.
so very much. Thank you. See you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.